Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 6. We're rolling right along here in this 365-day challenge towards racial change. Is what is my fictional name? Tomlin's Nyback. Tomlin's Nyback, of course, that's not my real name, but that's just to get your mental juices flowing. Scratch your head. Why is he calling himself Tomlin's Nyback? Maybe if I make it through 365 days, I'll clarify if you haven't gotten the joke yet. Oh, some housekeeping items just to make sure we're on the same page. Pardon the pun, but we're talking and we're informed from a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. He's the author of a book called A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. And trust me, if you are anything like me, you never thought to understand the things he broaches in that important book. That was the first book I read. Second book, Black Labor and White Wealth. He goes a little deeper. There's it's much more focused on the differences between black and white existence in America. And notice it's black labor, white wealth. They actually should be overturned because the white wealth rests on the backs of black labor. And finally, his even more focused book, Powernomics, is in-depth his ideas of um, turning the tables for black America. And there's a lot of black Americans doing well in entertainment, in business even. It's a lot of black people quietly getting it done. But um, the ideas and things he brings out, it has changed my idea in my mind about America. I'm disturbed about America's hesitancy to really ultimately do right by black people. At present, they aren't. You know, you look at prison population, for one thing, could be a good example. How the percentage of blacks, like per capita, outweighs any racial, demographic, or color, and tied up in the prison system. And this goes all the way back. The roots of these issues and these problems go all the way back to slavery, the writing of the Constitution, founding of this country, how the colonies saw this opportunity to take advantage of black people, not minorities, not people of color, not all of the um, other groups, women, gays, homosexuals, and all that. They do have their valid claims um, on being vulnerable and needing some protection from the government and access to resources. But it's blacks. It's the reason they have any of these programs is because the black population in the United States was experiencing horrific conditions and needed change. And as a complete and whole group, we need a lot of help still. And actually, this work of his is actually more than a decade old now. I missed out on, I guess, when he was having his heyday about it. But all the things in there are still relevant, probably going to be relevant. Tough ideas and things to change. My little half-hour talks, I actually don't see him doing much. My purpose is to clear my head and to affirm what he's saying, because I've run into these blocks and problems in society, and when I broach the subject to people, my friends, and my community is mostly white, um, for a whole lot of reasons. We're not going to go into that there. But their eyes glaze over and everything. I got friends that talk about wealth and um, prosperity in America and how they complain when they're making $30,000 and $35,000 a year. I'm like, wow, I don't think I've ever consistently seen those numbers anywhere, and they can complain. So that there's a different mindset, ideology. Um, our American experience is totally different, and it's a color line. Never make a mistake about that. Another book we're going to talk about in the next upcoming days, we're going to get into this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, um, and written back in the mid 1800s by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It's a phenomenal book. When it was finally compiled and circulated, it was the second biggest seller. I don't know if in the country or the world, but um, right behind the Bible in 1852. This was number two. The Bible was number one. So it's a very foundational book, and literature, we'll talk about that as well, how literature impacts America from this. You get blackface, um, the theatrical um, display of black people, and blackface was worn by blacks and whites. So we'll talk about that as well if you don't know what blackface is. It's easy. Google some of this stuff. Some of these terms fly past you, and I'm not properly defining them. Go ahead and Google them. This is instant knowledge today. Slavery would look a whole lot different, and um, reparations and all that would be a whole lot different if we had computers and things back then to track all this. We know exactly who did what and where. The way we have cameras on our phones, it's hard to get away with stuff more and more. This the reality, almost the need for a kind of a 1984 existence. Orson Welles' book, 1984. If you haven't read that, read that. That we're moving in that direction, and some of it's justified because there are crazy people out there. But now with the advent of our technology being more and more refined, more invasive, people don't get away with crazy stuff anymore. So it would have been nice to have it on some occasions back there in the 16, 17, 1800s. And it's definitely a need today because this is 2019, and the world's not gotten any better. Today's subject is the Second Amendment. When I first started listening to Dr. Anderson and his claims about the Constitution being a document that excluded black people, or we're included in there, and he says broad and ambiguous terms where it specifically speaks to the people of the nation. It's speaking to white people of the nation, and uh, giving the white people of the nation uh, rights, privileges, and resources, things of that nature. Blacks were the unhappy lots, of some of the language in there. We're in there, but it's disguised and glossed over. Anyway, it's a document that does not speak directly to black people doing well in America. Black people were the engine. We cleared the land. We gleaned the fields. we did the work, and while white people benefited from that free labor and gave us nothing. There's a lot of lip service there in the Constitution and whatnot, and even emancipation, things like that. We weren't emancipated like in that moment, it just curtailed or resisted slave trade. We're going to get into Jim Crow, 100 years of that. There's black codes we're going to talk about. Just a constant barrage of resistance towards blacks doing well in America. And it's mind-blowing how far it goes. So that's why I keep ringing my bell. The process has begun in my mind. I used to work with an organization that worked with aspects of interpersonal violence, stalking, sexual assault, and domestic violence, three big ones under that umbrella. I find out that 3/4 of women on anywhere have been sexually assaulted. It means the women in my life, my mother, my sister, aunts, probably have faced some kind of unwanted sexual attention. So now when I'm out in the world or watching TV, that information informs some of my interactions with some women. Because, if 75% can be proven, that's highly likely that I'm dealing with something. And it plays out. We might talk about that at some point. Anyway, today's the Second Amendment. And that's important because Dr. Anderson, he would say, well, the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, the original intent was to comb the countryside and prevent slaves from gathering, putting uprisings together, lynch them if the slave was found without a pass or properly documented as being off the plantation and moving about. And there was a pass system, and slaves did go about, and there was some fellowship, but after work was done, you don't go off when the cotton fields are ripe or when it's time to harvest the tobacco or whatever. So the Second Amendment has the right to bear arms, and we go on and on in this country, back and forth every time there is some mass shooting with some type of homemade automatic weapon or an automatic weapon. Second Amendment comes up, and in America, it's another politicized subject, and because of that, what I'm going to talk about and what Dr. Anderson talks about the Second Amendment gets covered over because it becomes a political thing. And one side was the right to bear arms, and another side is about safety of Americans. And of course, both sides are right. And wherever you land on the issue, you'll never talk about the original intent of it. And we're going to talk about that right now. So the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, you can look that up. I don't know the word for word of it. But first, let's talk about the history and original intent of it. Now, to understand it, we need to understand a little tiny nation called Haiti down there in the Atlantic. In those islands, if my geography serves me, remember I'm doing a lot of this off the cuff. But Jamaica, Cuba, those tiny island groups. I think Bermuda might be in there, uh, if that's its own island. I think it is. Haiti is one of them. That they had a terrible flood a few years back. A lot of people got wiped out. It's a black nation, French speaking, because it was first acquired, I guess, by France, and it was there that France performed their slavery experimentation, their slave commerce on the island of Haiti. Well, back on August 22nd, 1791, a man named Toussaint Louverture, excuse my French, led a revolt against France, and then they had to stave off a few other nations um, to stay free, becoming their own independent nation. They're the only black peoples to do that. Um, it's interesting. I don't have a lot of good things to say about the blacks who came to America and suddenly found themselves in this position. But I understand it happened over time, and the process. They didn't just wake up slaves. The technology and the process grew over a long period of time. But this group of blacks, and they were helped out by other people, renegades or whatever, on Haiti as well. That began in August of 1791, and they won it. They became their own nation, and you would think it goes well, but not so. Haiti's not very high on the program of wealth, um, because they're a black nation. I'm guessing, then the world has done to that nation what it kind of does to black people in America. It simply leaves them isolated. They're literally on an island in the ocean, so they really have to work hard. This is something I maybe should investigate. They really need to work hard to get some commerce and to interact with the world economically, to uh, stay viable there on that island. They've done it for since 1791, but it's not noted as being one of the richest nations in the world. I don't know what is of worth on the island. That they trade or anything. I don't have anything made by Haiti. It's something to think about. But it's still better to be free and independent and making your own way, even if you have little. So that's August 22nd, 1791. 4 or 5 months later, as this slave revolt, this successful slave revolt, makes news all over the world, no doubt. It definitely tickles the ears of slave owners and handlers in America, and probably slaves too. You see here, like, man, that nation went to the moon. That nation built an atom bomb. The Jewish people, they came out after their Holocaust, World War II, and got their own nation. You hear about another human being doing something, it's like, they're human beings. I could do that too. Excuse me. So when the news is in the States circulating and making a buzz, you can bet that the white slave owners and handlers don't want that kind of talk, that kind of hope pervading the lives of slaves. You don't want them. The one thing about slavery, as I'm getting my little education and reading some information, is you don't want them hopeful, like a prisoner of war. You don't want them thinking they can escape or be successful as a prisoner, things like that. You want total control, you want to manipulate them, keep them in a hopeless state, let them believe that the person with the keys and the power has everything going their direction, and that the slave or the prisoner is at the mercy of this system. So, like I said, 4 or 5 months later, December 15th, 1791, the Second Amendment comes about. And there's talk about, well, there's some justifiable talk about um, Americans being able to protect themselves and to be prepared in case of another invasion or war and whatnot. And some of what influenced America's adoption of these ideas of protecting themselves and arming themselves, and that every citizen having that right, was gleaned or informed by English common law through a guy named Blackstone, if I'm correct. So here again, it's about arming oneself. It's about being an American, having the right to have arms and all that. But it wasn't for blacks. That's why we need to keep that line very clear. It wasn't for blacks. It was in case of black uprising. There were numerous and several. We're going to talk about Florida and some of the successful um, blacks who fought to the death, determined not to be slaves. And there's old, twisted, complicated history that goes on with Florida and all that. But in general, this December 15th, 1791, few months after the Haitian Revolution, the Second Amendment miraculously and magically appears as part of the Constitution. And it's not for blacks. It's for. There's talk of militia in that amendment, and it's for these groups of white men to roam the countryside, looking for runaways, keeping any kind of rebellion down, any escape plans, organization out of the hands and minds of slaves. And they do that. We're not going to do that by force. The Second Amendment at that time, it was more of an imperative. You know, um, and like I say, it's not for blacks. Slaves weren't armed. Well, we're also going to talk later about how the Native Americans figured into this, and Dr. Anderson brings out a lot of information how some of our Native Americans, the Indians, the people they say were here, how they took advantage of the unarmed slave, catching them, killing them, uh, helping to hunt them, and such, and how that people group went on and assisted. Some of those groups assisted um, white America and capturing slaves and helping out with slavery. Talk some about that. But back to the Second Amendment. Now, how that comes out today is, I have this belief that white supremacy, not the skinhead type, but just the idea of white people being in charge, having a right to resources that appear to be neglected, that spirit runs right up here into the 21st century. We had a terrible summer, I think it was 2017, 2016. Young black men were just getting gunned down almost every day, handful every month by white police officer. It was always a white police officer, young black man. You know, one black man was legally armed. I personally hate guns, but I'm going to learn how to handle them. But this young black man was legally armed, and I guess a routine traffic stop, but the cop asked him for some identification. Young black man's reaching for it. His gun is there, visible on the side. The white police officer thinks he's being drawn on, at least that's what he says, and puts two rounds point blank into the black man's chest in the car. Fortunately, there was a young girl there as a witness, but we know how that goes, as far as bringing police to justice. It's always a lot. You use a lot of resources to make that happen and make that successful. So there's a Second Amendment and other parts of the Constitution exclude blackness from what it's a document that enriches a white nation, supports a white supremacy, not the skinhead type. I don't think it goes that far, but it's an exclusionary document for blacks. And the right to bear arms, yeah, I can go through a process and I don't have too many barriers to make that happen. To legally obtain a firearm and join a gun club and go to the range. It's not. There's no barriers per se like that concerning me. But when that amendment was created and adopted, it was for white people and it excluded blacks. We're going to talk later about being prepared, being armed, knowing how to survive in the case of a catastrophe. I don't think a whole lot of black people are prepared, but white people go out consistently with firearms and bows and arrows that they can hunt and start fires and make it if there's a collapse. So the Second Amendment was for whites, and it kept the blacks at a disadvantage again, and still in some ways because of the spirit that prevails here even in the 21st century. So thanks for stopping by again. My name again is Tom Nybeck. Check out the community at #us2, and you can hear more about conversation about Black life in America. Thanks.